immediately. What does that mean? What is going to give it some meaning? And then you make another move within the thing, and that solves, perhaps, partially solves the first problem, but you've set up 3 or 4 more. So you keep solving problems by adding, by subtracting, and the whole shape of the thing becomes elliptical, ideally. You build problems, you build problems, you build problems, and you solve some, and you solve some, and you build more, and then you get to a point where it won't contain any more problems, and you've got to solve the ones that you've already set up. And ideally, the ellipse finishes when you've solved all the problems. The chances of getting to that point are very slim. Generally speaking, if you are reasonably successful, you might get to there. If you're extraordinarily lucky or a genius or something like that, you might get to there. But I don't think only Allah gets to there. Only Allah is perfect. It's and it's the same in as far as acting is concerned. The moment you go into a rehearsal, this is an interesting point too. You go to read a play at the first reading when you start rehearsal, and you read it in a certain way, and you have a certain view of the character and his relationship with the others, and you pick up those relationships as you read, and you build on those if you can at that time. And that first impression is so enormously important. You then start on the rehearsal procedure, and you go right round the circle until you come back to this first thing. But by the time you get back to that first thing, you know what you're doing. You didn't the first time. It was instinctive. But that instinctive thing is enormously important. Sometimes you don't get all the way back. Sometimes you can get bogged down over here somewhere, you know. But I think that in the main, if you have time is, and here's Clothier's first maxim, there is no art without time, which I believe soundly. Time is necessary for things to soak in, for problems to be solved. You know, there are a lot of problems that you cannot solve immediately. Again, going back to sculpture, but it applies to all the arts. You are going through your problem solving. You come across, you can work quite happily solving problems away at a great rate and think the world is absolutely wonderful, and then bang, you hit something you cannot solve at that time. You're not ready to solve it. You've set things up in such a way that the problem seems insoluble. You leave it, and it grinds around, and eventually, one hopes, comes out. The solution is there for that problem, and then you can go on solving another lot of problems until you hit another one like that. This happens all the time. Now, if you're working at sculpture, generally speaking, your time is elastic. If you're working in a set rehearsal period in the theater, your time is not quite so elastic. If you're working for a company like the Arts Club, your time is even less elastic because you don't have that length of rehearsal. If you're working at the Playhouse, you're getting the best part of 4 weeks rehearsal. And you can solve a great many of the problems in that time. But I know that, for example, in Europe, and I've talked to theater people in Europe, I have a brother-in-law who is a writer and director and that kind of thing. And he would never tackle anything under 6 weeks, preferably 10. And that is luxury. We don't get that luxury. So it is quite possible then to get partway around that circle back to this instinctive thing that you had in the first place, the intuitive thing, and not quite make it all the way back. But that basically that's the process anyway.
That's true. That's true with life too.
Oh yes, oh, very much so. Not all of us flop into our graves fulfilled.
No. Chances are unlikely. Are we okay, Annie? In terms of
I've been
door?
recording.
Yeah. From the sort of philosophical to the specific.
Yeah.
Could you sort of lead off perhaps with how you?
I'll just wait here.
We have a visitor.
Oh, Clem, you better go out.
He just wants to be part of it. I don't know if he'll come up.
Come on, Clem. Come on.
We'll let your mic there.
Come on.
There you go. Come on. Hi.
That's it.
See you later. Okay. Whatever.
Take two.
Okay.
All right, now am I back in the right position for you?
You betcha.
Good.
So I wanted to talk about the Players Club and how you started with them and how that all came about.
Well, it was really rather amusing, actually. I thought, because I was an orthopedic croc from an aircraft accident, I thought I was going to have some sort of sedentary occupation, because I had been paraplegic. But I was walking around by this time, by the time I went to university, without canes and that kind of thing. And so I decided to try architecture. And yes, it was very interesting, but I was not that good at mathematics or that interested in mathematics. It was probably the aesthetics of architecture that appealed to me most. And while I was studying there, I met some people and joined the Players Club. They did a sort of audition thing for one to join, and they seemed to approve of what I was doing, so I became a member. And really the only thing I did in the Players Club was a School for Scandal that Joy Coghill directed. It was quite wonderful. I played old Crabtree, and Phil Keatley, television film man and all that kind of thing, ex-CBC, and he played Backbite, and the two of them go as a pair through the play. And I really thoroughly enjoyed it. Thought, oh, well, this is great sport. Well, we'll keep up some of this. Then, when I was mulling over the whole business of architecture, whether I should continue with that or not, I got very drunk one night, sitting with some friends on the floor of what was part of my parents' basement, and that had been sequestered by my sister as a studio, because she's a painter, my younger sister. And sitting there, I got really quite boiled and said, oh, the hell with all this architecture nonsense. I'll never be an architect. Oh, I'm going into the theatre. Well, what am I going to do about it? I'm going to go to England. There I can learn something about theatre. So I did. And was initially, the immediate reaction to me over there was not all that bright, but I managed to make something of a go of things. I was not what you'd call a roaring success, but I managed to do one tiny bit in the West End at one time. Most of the time I was working in tatty rep companies and tours such as Arts Council tours and things of that nature. Enjoyed that. Was hard work. Weekly rep is absolutely devastating, and you don't want to stay in it too long. It's a wonderful training ground, provided you don't stay too long. Because if you stay too long, you end up nothing but a creature of habits. And trick here to get you through, because you've learned, you've been playing one play during the weekend, rehearsing the next play, which you open after a week's rehearsal. So the play goes on not fully understood, the character not fully understood, and you're hanging on at times by the skin of your teeth. But you get through, and you do learn a lot from it. If you stay in that sort of situation for more than, say 6 months, you can have developed, or begin to develop at any rate, a lot of rather bad habits that are very difficult to get rid of.
Going back to the Players Club for a second, and this was the first time you had met Joy Coghill, I presume. This is your
Yes, it was.
Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, any impressions of her at that time? Or
Oh, a ball of energy and an understanding of what she wanted to get out of the play and the characters and that sort of great understanding. It was a very good production, actually, as I remember, a very enjoyable production, and I think it was moderately successful when you consider that she was dealing with rank amateurs. And very inexperienced amateurs at that. I thought she did a tremendous job of it.
What about, did you have any opportunity to meet or experience Sidney Riston or Dorothy Somerset, or was it your...
No, I never worked with Dorothy at all. I knew her quite well, of course, but I never worked with her at all. The other one that I think you were thinking of was Sidney Risk, wasn't it? Yeah. Well, Sidney, I knew reasonably well. I never worked with Sidney. I liked him very much. Sidney was a delight and enormously enthusiastic and dedicated to theatre. One of the early enthusiasts, so to speak. A very nice fellow, actually. Very talented fellow too.
When you came back from England, that's when you worked with Theatre Under the Stars?
No, I did one thing with Theatre Under the Stars. I was in Florodora before I went to England. The summer before I went in the, when did I go? Oh, just before Christmas I went to England. And 48. And that summer I did my first professional job, which was in Theatre Under the Stars, and a thing called Florodora. Wonderful old show, actually. Silly, but quite wonderful.
Was that, the only character I could come up with, as I explained to you, was Donegal. Was that in that particular production?
Yeah, I think that's what his name was. I can't really remember, actually, but I think so. There were some lovely things attached to that. We were in, we opened it in Victoria, in a ballpark, with Boy Scouts holding up the set because it was going to be blown over by the usual ubiquitous Victoria wind. And Bill Buckingham had taken over, I can't remember the character's name either, though sort of one of the lead characters, because Evie Young, you obviously know of Evie Young, a wonderful old expatriate Englishman who was really quite something of a star in those days and did a lot of work with Tuts. But Evie became ill, and at the last minute, Bill Buckingham, who had been directing the show, had to take over. He marched on stage for one scene in Victoria and discovered, of course, that he had come in early on the scene previous. And he said, "Oh, goodness gracious, I got off at the wrong island," turned around, walked off, and waited until his proper cue came, and back on he came and played the scene. Very cool, very, very nicely done, too.
That was, I mean, I wasn't aware Theatre and the Star actually toured. Was that an unusual situation to go to Victoria? Or was that
It was rather, yes. I don't know quite why it was decided to open it in Victoria, but we played a week in Victoria and then came to Stanley Park, of course, and at the Malkin Bowl, and opened it there, and it ran quite happily there.
Your quote was, all I could find was, "We did a lot of comedy and we had a lot of fun."
Oh, yes. Oh, Lord, yes. Well, you see, you've been, and this is later, of course, because by the time of other productions, I was already back from England and was working in radio a lot here. It was our bread and butter, and anything else might have been a little jam on it. And one of the good jams on it was Tuts, because you'd get out in the early summer, out into the open, with this huge audience in front of you, and cavort about the stage and have an absolutely marvelous time. And there were good productions. There were very good productions. I remember Jimmy Johnson directed quite a number of them. I always liked working with Jimmy. He'd throw tantrums here and there, but he was very good. And, what are some of the productions I did do with her? Merry Widow, Student Prince, Anything Goes. Lovely time in that one. I don't know what all else, actually, but those are sort of the three main ones that I did. I think, if I remember correctly, the standard of those productions was very high, and it was such a shame that the company got drowned in the rain, so to speak. It died. But it was good company, and they had good people and well-mounted shows, good-looking shows, well-performed, and old Harry Price down in the pit conducting the orchestra, and you could practically, when it got damp in Stanley Park, you could hear the strings sagging on the violins.
Just want to stop for a second. Is that any audio problems or okay?
No, I'm not picking it up enough.
Okay.
Like I can hear it in the room, but I'm not hearing it through there.
Okay. So who would you say are the key people responsible for Tuts at that time in terms of making it the success that it was? You were saying Jimmy Johnson?
Jimmy Johnson, Bill Buckingham, I can't remember the man's name who was one of the key people in that. That's stupid. It just slid out the side of my head. I can't think of his name. But old Ellen Randalls, of course, was sort of the office of it and kept an eye on us all. And Bill and Doris Buckingham were very key to it. And Jimmy and Kathy Johnson. And those were the chief ones, I think. Mm-hmm.
How big an orchestra was it you were saying you had?
I couldn't begin to tell you. I played silly ass comedy there a lot. I only ever sang once on the stage. I got away with it too, but it was in Carousel. I played Jigger in Carousel. Had the blow high, blow low number to do all this sort of whaling we will go nonsense. There was, it was, oh yes, oh God. One of the lines in that piece was, a rockin' upon the sea, your boat will seem to be like a dear little baby in its bassinet, and something silly after that. And I started into this with a great flare one night, a walking upon the sea. Oh God, that was, but I had to correct that one fairly quickly.
You talked about the fact that you were doing a lot of radio back then. And
oh yes.
It's difficult. I found it very difficult in research to find specific series that you may have worked on. So I'm sort of throwing this out to you in the sense that. How specific can you be, or how much do you remember about those days, and how it came about that you were introduced to working on radio? Do you remember the introduction to it?
Well, I started into radio having had the sort of standard CBC radio audition, which people seemed to think was tolerable, so I was hired to do a part in Marine Investigator, which was one of the very early series. And that would have been in 54, I think, yeah, 54. I had come back from England to see my parents, ostensibly to stay for 6 months and go back over to England again. Decided when I got here that this was my country, this was where I was going to work, and that's flat. So I went down, took the radio audition, and did a part in the this Marine Investigator show that the late lamented Doug Haskins played the lead in. I've never seen anybody who could saw his way through a script the way Doug could. He'd have notes all around and rewrites all around the margin of his script, and he was turning the script and reading those, and he was quite incredible that way. But then I went up north to do some diamond drilling on a silver property that my father had up there, which turned out to be not too good. And I was up in Alice Arm for about 6 months, and then came back down and immediately went back into radio again. I think the first thing that I did coming down was another Marine Investigator. Now, what happened in those days around Vancouver was that there was this sort of this series going, and then there was a thing called Vancouver Theatre, which was half-hour play, and that was every week. You weren't in it every week, but from, well, I suppose one I was in about half of them, something of that nature. Now, for a half-hour program, say an episode of Marine Investigator, you were paid $25. If you did a Vancouver Theatre, now that was different because they had live orchestra for that. So you got extra rehearsal, an extra hour. And that hour paid you another $2.50, so you got $27.50 for that show. And this is the sort of thing that you ran on. There was a bit of television that time too, but not a vast amount. There were things like Hidden Pages, which were very nice to do. And Minnow on the Say, which my wife Shirley Broderick played a lead in and did all the narration for and the introductions to, and that was a good series. It terrified her because she had no time to prepare and was suddenly there on camera. not playing a part, but actually narrating and introducing the thing, which is always more terrifying than actually trying to play a part. But that was our living. And at that time, radio was really the only thing that ran the full width of the country. It was one of the things CBC radio tied the country together. It was our national theater, radio drama. And so much of it was done live. It was recorded for the West Coast and sent live to the East. Oh yes, and that could be quite nerve-wracking. There were other series on radio too. I remember King Solomon's Mines that Ian Thorne adapted and played in. A series on what devil is the name? The fellow who went through the Spanish fellow who went through Mexico to the Pacific.
Oh, I know what
I'm picking that up.
Okay, maybe we should stop for a second.
Yeah.
The kingpin, I guess you might say, of radio drama, at least that's the way he's...
Yes, he was at that time. And he set a certain style. Andrew was very much a stylist and a classicist. A wonderful director, merciless director, quite wonderful. But the man who was running things in the 50s here, as far as drama was concerned, was Ray Whitehouse. Now, Ray Whitehouse, a lot of energy, not the classicist, but very much the modernist, and much more the popular type of producer, director. And he did an extraordinarily good job. He got things on. You see, you did a half-hour show. You had 3 hours rehearsal, and then you went live. And in that time, he would do rewrites of cuts and rewrites, because the thing had to, you were always subject to speed it up or stretch it out. And he would slash whole things out, and write this instead, and so you did. And this is where Doug, of course, had these things all around his script. We all did a bit of that, but he was the expert. And Ray was an enormously energetic and enthusiastic. And all the things that he did, he was enormously enthusiastic, and would, if it was going well, great shouts of glee and what have you. If it wasn't going very well, look out. But I think he set the tone for a good deal of the 50s work. Then along came Gerald Newman. Now, Gerald was every inch the classicist, still is. And we did enormous productions with Gerald. I think we did everything from Greek tragedy to contemporary farce. And he encouraged new writers. There were some lovely things that we did that Betty Lambert wrote, for example. And some that Michael Mercer wrote. There were several other people who wrote really very well for radio. I think probably the best of them was Betty Lambert, who was a personal friend of Gerald's as well, so he could have a greater influence perhaps on. She started really wanting to write very facile detective type things, but Gerald recognized a greater depth in her and brought that depth out, and she wrote such things as The Good of the Sun, which is one of my favorites. The Wall is another very good one, and The Best Room in the House, which is a great radio play. I can't remember the titles of other ones. And Shirley and I worked a great deal on radio with Gerald then, in everything, as I say, from Greek tragedy on. We did Shakespeare, Restoration, other Elizabethan things too, and even some Victorian drama, most of which is not terribly well known. And Edwardian, quite a lot of Edwardian stuff.
You did things called The School. There was school dramas or something.
Oh yes, there was the schools. I'd forgotten about that, of course. And then there was the Farms broadcast as well. And I played a fellow by the name of Jackson on that. Was a bit of a devious character, second-hand machinery and what have you, man. Whenever he sold it was as new, of course. Those were fun. I remember missing one of those. It was snowing like merry old hell, and I had to go in from here to the studios downtown, and I couldn't get across the bridge. And it's the only time that I've ever missed a show. The bridge, Lionsgate Bridge, just plugged with snow and traffic cars all over the place. And so I got out into the middle of the bridge and couldn't make it any farther. Eventually had to turn around in the middle of the bridge and come back. But yes, the schools broadcasts, and they covered quite a wide range of things, actually. And the Farms broadcasts, various series of things, and of course Vancouver Theatre.
The school broadcast, what was that? I mean, was that for schools that the students would tune in, or is that what was the motivation?
It was for schools, yes. Over a wide range of subjects, actually. Dramatized, and they were quite short. I think they were 15-minuters, but they were certainly worth doing and interesting. Quite often, very interesting stuff to do. Tax the ingenuity a bit. But when we got working with Gerald, we got onto this much more classical path, and then the work really became exciting because it was new, and the whole Gerald's whole attitude was entirely different. There was nothing slick about it. It was a rather purist way of looking at things, and no gimmicks, no tricks or anything of this nature, and very, very little. He used none of this sort of transition music from scene to scene. We would play almost in the Shakespeare style, where one scene gives on to another scene, and it's because the Shakespeare, the old staging of Shakespeare was just one scene flowed from another scene, from another scene, from another scene. There were no gaps in that kind of thing. And he would use a fade out of a scene sometimes, but sometimes he would just straight into the next scene, which I found quite fascinating. Always produced with a great deal of intelligence, and quite often with some sensitivity.
Did you cross paths with people like Joy Coghill during the radio time? Did you work?
Oh yes, oh sure, yes. No, I remember. Yes, I remember she played Cleopatra and I played Enobarbus. And Peter Howarth played Antony. There's a man, my God, now, there's I've never come across anybody who could read verse, interpret verse like Peter. Just really quite splendid.
You, I don't know if there was something more there you were going to say, I don't know.
No, that's
okay. This would have been TV, I guess. I don't know if this was your Sam Spar.
Oh yes, that was
a celebrity in town.
That was yes. Well, Peter Mannering had been doing this Timothy T. show, playing Captain Peter, and then he had to leave it. And I had been doing a lot of because it was done with shadow puppet, voiceover for shadow puppets, apart from Peter, who was the sort of live thing on it. Very cleverly done with shadow puppets, actually. And we had to produce all kinds of voices for them. That was rather good, too. And then they decided that as Peter was going to be dropping from it, they had to have a replacement, and that's where Sam Spar came in. I wasn't really very good. I think I was really rather bad, actually. In fact, I think it was terrible. But it was again a good experience.
And that went on for how long? Was that just a...
Oh, that was relatively short-lived, that one, yeah.
Were there any other sort of highlights in terms of that time for you, in terms of television, that you remember?
Yeah, this was the first thing when I came down from my sort of diamond drilling expedition up in Alice Arm. There was a show, God, I can't remember it was a series of 1-hour things, and they had a theme running through this. It was not a variety thing really, but built on those lines. And there was a skit in that. It was a time when on the waterfront the Marlon Brando thing was very much in people's minds, and this was a lampoon of that. I think it was written by Eric Nichol, and I had to play the boss. I had a big beard. I'd grown a beard while I was for 6 months in the bush, and when I first went up to the bush, I cut all my hair off, and so my hair was in rather odd shape, I suppose. This sort of big red spade-cut beard, and I was playing the waterfront boss, and Doug Haskins was playing the Brando part. His girlfriend was being played by Ray Brown, who later played Molly on the. Ray was such a good radio actress, excellent radio actress too. Yeah. But that was great fun. But there were things like that occurred from time to time, and then there was the Hidden Pages series, which was quite remarkable in that every time got to the point where every time there was, it happened weekly, The library would call up Beth Gillanders, who was the I don't know, hostess of this thing, and say, what books are you using on hidden pages? And they'd have to get extra copies in, and books related, and have to get masses all gathered together all they could, because there'd be a vast run on these things at the library as soon as the program was done. The program comprised dramatization of sections of books, and I can't really think of any of the books right now, but some largely classical, not necessarily children's stories, but stories that will appeal to children. And they were a lot of them extremely well done. Jack Thorne, who was married to Joy Coghill, was one of the prime producers on that. And very severe was Jack, very severe, very exact and very severe. Wonderful fellow. Jack has a great depth to him, quiet depth to him.
I can imagine the technology back there was pretty primitive, and the lights must have been, the cameras were probably needing a lot of light. Do you remember it being?
Yes, I remember it. Well, of course, you see, at the time, this was pretty new stuff to us, so it looked technically very advanced, but of course it wasn't. It was, all those ones were done in the old television studios, which had been a garage, a concrete floored garage on Georgia Street, Georgia and Butte. And the lighting was very difficult, and actually staging a lot of these things, I'll start that one all over again because my stomach just rumbled through it. At that time, the CBC television studios, they had their offices in the same building too. It was an old, rather low-ceilinged garage with a concrete floor at Butte and Georgia, and very difficult to light because the lighting grid was so low that sometimes it was very difficult to avoid picking it up, the cameras picking it up. And you couldn't get any real height of set or anything of this nature. Staging was enormously difficult there. But I think they did some wonderful stuff out of it. We all found it very exciting at any rate, terrifying too, because it was live. I remember we were doing something that involved, yes, it was something to do with the Crusades, that's right. And Peter Brockington was playing a Saracen who quietly slit his way into a tent. I don't know who was in the tent, I can't remember. And when the knife came down, it stuck him in the leg. And there was blood all over the place, but this was live because there wasn't anything he could do about it. And so he had rather a painful time of that performance. There were a few instances of that sort of, accidents happening and that kind of thing. But it was all live, so it just had to be covered and get on with it.
Explaining the blood on your outfit as you
So I had a nosebleed yesterday. Ooh.
Speaking of hot productions, or in terms of the temperature, well, first of all, maybe start off with, could you tell me a little bit about the Vancouver International Festival, its origins?
Oh, yes. Well, let me, I don't know what's happening. It's all gizzard, it's all gurgling around. Well, the Vancouver International Festival had a forerunner in a production of The Tempest, which was done at the old auditorium at UBC. And that was directed by Dougie Seal, then late of the Birmingham Rep. And let me see now. Peter Mannering played Prospero. Lee Taylor played Ferdinand. I can't remember who it was who played Miranda. Shirley Broderick played Ariel. Jack Thorne played Stefano. I played Trinculo, and that's where Shirley and I met. And very shortly thereafter, we were married, and we still are. That was a very interesting production. It didn't truly work, but there was some very nice stuff. And Jack Thorne's Stefano was extremely good, and Shirley's Ariel was quite splendid. And then, following that, the first real festival production was The World of the Wonderful Dark, which was nicknamed by Gerald Newman The World of the Dubious Obscurity. Rather aptly, I think. And there are all kinds of people brought out to play in that. Toronto actors and that sort of thing. But I was playing in that also, playing an Indian fellow who he sort of scrounged a living from the beach, so to speak. It was fun to do. We toured it all over the province and covered ourselves every performance with this Dallas dirt stuff that got over everything. You couldn't touch anything. I'm sure that all the hotels that we stayed in, for example, were very glad to see us go. But then they'd have a chance to clean up this muck that we left behind. Yeah, it was. It wasn't all that successful.
You said it was dubious. I mean, what did you mean by that?
Well, it was based. Lister Sinclair wrote the thing. It was roughly based on Hamlet, a sort of West Coast Indian Hamlet, and sometimes it got a little bit close to the Bard's dialogue, a couple of places. I remember one at the end, the Good Night, Sweet Prince speech. Dougie Seal, who was directing it, said, don't you think that that we should modify that speech somewhat? And Lister said, oh, well, yes, it is a little light, isn't it? But I think everybody enjoyed it. We had certain arguments with the script, and not too many arguments with the production. It was well done for what it was, and it toured quite happily.
And speaking, I spoke to Lister Sinclair and also Barry Morris. I guess Barry liked to have these quite visual death scenes.
Oh yes, indeed. Mm-hmm. Barry, John Draney was in it. Huey Webster was in it. Who the hell else? I can't remember.
Was there some challenges from your point of view in terms of the venue, the Georgia Auditorium? I guess it was chosen by time.
Georgia Auditorium was an incredible place. It had been an ice rink, of course, part of the building had been. I think the old ice rink burned down, and this was what was left of the building. and they turned it into a theater. I remember going to concerts there. I went to a concert given by Tito Skipa, their wonderful tenor who was long past his prime at that time. That's one thing. And then Sam Payne, great fellow Sam Payne. Sam started up a summer repertory company using the Georgia Auditorium. I worked, did several shows with them. It was not an easy place, easy auditorium to work, because you were playing very wide, and you were on a fairly wide stage, too wide for some of the plays that were being done, some of the small cast thing that didn't fit into this rather wide, rather shallow stage. But they were good to do. They were fun to do. No, it was an awkward place, an awkward auditorium to play, to fill the auditorium properly with the piece. But I think we all enjoyed it. Again, here we'd been doing radio all winter, and then along comes summer rep. That's something to get out to do, too.
No, we forget to
Okay.
change names.
They have booked with the city, and it's a civic theater, and there's no reason why they shouldn't have it. And the Playhouse Theater loses a performance. Now that, what is it, 560 some odd seats, which is not really big enough for a company like the Playhouse Company to make a go of it. It's economically very unsound. One of the things that happened was that the city fathers, or whoever it was that was in control of this thing, decided that there were going to be conventions and things around there, and therefore they needed a much bigger foyer. So they cut out something like 4 or 5 rows of seats. And those 4 or 5 rows of seats could have made, certainly in those days, could have made all the difference between, breaking in even and losing money. I don't know the exact number of seats that were originally planned, but this was an absolutely fatuous idea. Idiots!
Speaking of the Vancouver Playhouse, now correct me if I'm wrong, because I was talking to Joy and she couldn't remember this. Malcolm Black wasn't the first artistic director.
No.
He was. Sorry, could you?
A fellow by the name of Johnson. Can't remember anything more about him, actually.
But
Except he's a very nice bloke and very intelligent and all that sort of thing, but it didn't seem to me that he should be running a company. When Malcolm Black came in, he supplied an enormous amount of energy. I don't know that Malcolm and I actually saw eye to eye about things theatrical, but he certainly did bring in a great jolt of energy and a great enthusiasm, and was what? How can I put this? He ran, his seasons ran a great spread of kinds of material, which I think was probably too scattered. There were some things that he tried to do that he didn't understand himself, and I didn't find those particularly successful. But he was an energetic driving force. And I think that's probably his greatest contribution was energy, as much as anything else.
Was that you didn't see eye to eye was because he was too broad in terms of his choices?
No. Often I felt he simply didn't understand the play that he was directing. That's a hell of a thing to say about somebody. And, I have said it to his face, so it doesn't. I don't think that matters that much. Then, didn't quite often. He understood the mechanics of the piece and how to stage it and all that sort of thing, but the underlying meaning of the play, significance of the play, that kind of thing didn't seem to be taken into consideration at all, so that it sat up on a much lighter level.
Now, when he came, correct me if I'm wrong again, was not John Hirsch slotted to direct a play and then
Yes, he was.
Could you talk about that, what happened there?
Well, I wasn't involved in that. I think that was the hostage, wasn't it? That, yeah. I was not involved in the hostage. Well, there's another one that I really didn't see eye to eye with, was John Hirsch, of course. He was very good, very thorough and strong director. But I don't think, see, I never had any real dealings with him, but I'm damn sure that we wouldn't have got along terribly well together.
Okay. Well, in the second part of the season, there was Julius Caesar.
Oh, yes.
And you were Cassius.
Yes, I played Cassie very badly.
And Moore was directing.
That's right, yeah. Yes, it was a modern dress production. Actually, no particular costume at all. We were all sort of in, I think, gray tops and black slacks or something of this nature, that sort of thing. So that there was no sort of, Roman armor or shields and helmets and all that. I think that it was a very good attempt. It, to some extent, came off. We had a hell of a time, though, with the school matinees. Particularly my old school, St. George's, they were the worst behaved bunch you've ever come across. They're bloody hoodlums. And when I died as Cassius, I sank onto the stage in terribly dramatic fashion. And of course, once there, couldn't move. Their things and peppermints and pennies and things had been thrown onto the stage, and I died on top of a peppermint. One of these sort of horse pill peppermints, about sort of so size that my hip was right on it. I couldn't move. I was defunct. I couldn't move. And it was one of the most painful things I've ever had to endure, because old Cassius lies there for quite some time in his defunct state. And I've never forgiven those rotten little buggers for it, actually.
Was this the first time that you worked with Mavor Moore?
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
Oh, I like working with Mavor. Yeah. Very sensitive, very intelligent, knowledgeable man. Great actor himself, actually. And a very good director. No, I really enjoyed working with Mavor.
Who else was in the cast?
Oh, Who played what? I really can't remember. Isn't that silly? Oh, I know Derek Ralston was in it, wasn't he? Yeah. No, I really can't remember.
The following season,
Oh, yes.
you did Ring Around the Moon and The Taming of the Shrew.
Mm-hmm.
Was the company more, cohesive at that point, or was there a change?
Well, by that time, you see, there was the beginnings of a core to the company. That was a good thing that that Malcolm did. He kept a core of sort of the basic people that he needed for his productions, kept them employed, and held them together, which was a great advantage. It's always a great advantage if you can have, you see, people that you know, that you've worked with quite a lot, and you go into rehearsal with a company made up of these people. You've saved yourself a week's rehearsal. You're a week ahead there because you know what to expect. You know these people. You don't have to sort of trot around saying, well, I don't know how he's going to react to me, or I'm going to react to him, and that sort of thing. You take the first week to fill all that in. You don't need to do that. You've got it there. So that is a very, very good way to operate. And then you can job other people in to join this company core. And that worked really rather well. Ring Around the Moon was a moderately successful production. The Shrew was actually really rather good production. I had a lovely time in that. I played Christopher Sly in that thing. Let me see, just trying to think who all was in it. Now, Lee Taylor played Petruchio. I can't remember who played Kate. There was somebody from out of town who played Kate. I know Joe Golland was in it. Oh, it's so silly. Memory like a sieve.
Would this be the same? Will you know when I ask you, like, who were the core company? Was there several? I mean.
Oh yes, it was John Giuliani was one. Davy Hughes was another. I was sort of on the fringes of this. I was part of the core company, but not in every production. Did I mention Lee Taylor? He certainly was. Sam Payne was often in these productions. Joe Golland was often in these productions. As to the women, I'm just trying to remember. Shirley did a lot. Susan Ringwood did a lot with the company as well. So we were, the core company sort of went in bits and pieces. It wasn't a solid core company that worked every show, but it was very close to that. You'd miss a show and work the next one, and a few things like that. But that was the sort of beginnings then of a true repertory company. But we never, ever got to having a complete repertory company. Not in all the time the theatre's been there. Come close to it at times, but it's never been fully our rep company.
What do you remember of when Joy Coggle arrived? Was there a change, or?
When Joy came in, Joy's, I think, strongest point was to make of it a classical company. That's not only ancient stuff, I don't mean all of it, we did a lot of that, but modern classic as well. But the whole tenor of the company changed to that of a truly classical company, which I think was a very good move, because by that time you had the Arts Club was going. I think Bill Millard was running it by that time, and there was your popular theatre. And if you've got a popular theatre, then to have as your main government subsidized theatre, I think it is necessary to have something of a classical nature, because you're running into you're making use of and expounding, if you like, the basis of all our theatre. And I think the classics are, you've got to do them extraordinarily well. No, you can't play, do slipshod productions. You've got to have really good, solid productions of anything of a classical nature, because they've been done so well in the past that you're not going to get away with it otherwise. And I think that it is very much to Joy's credit that she did change the direction of the theatre that way. I think that's probably her greatest contribution to it. And she did some really quite beautiful productions.
Having experienced the Cassius lying on a piece of candy in
Mm-hmm.
incredible pain, how did you feel about Joy's comment about to the audience that if you didn't find the performance stimulating enough, please throw things onto the stage to inform the actors?
I thought it was a bit of a lark. Didn't bother me in the slightest, actually. If anything had hit me, I'd throw it back. You don't like my performance? Okay, you can take this back again. But no, I really think that was a bit of a lark somehow. But it's what you see. It is what classical, the older productions of classical theatre went through. If people didn't like it, then they'd boo and shout and bawl and throw things, and that's what Joy was saying. That let us know. Be alive as an audience. Don't just sit there as if you're in front of a television set or something like that. This is live theatre. It's happening there. You, the audience in the theatre, has to work. Willy-nilly. You can't just sit there and say, all right, show me. The performers give something to the audience, and the audience gives something back. It's a two-way street, led off by the people on stage, of course. But there is a reaction to that, good, bad, or indifferent, that the audience has to supply. How can you can't have comedy without laughs. You're playing a farce and nobody laughs. It's, oh my God, what's wrong here? You see, this isn't quite right somehow. So that's one good example of it. But you can feel intense things on stage. If you have some very, very tense scene on stage, you can feel that tension in the audience. And it feeds you. And that is, I think that's what Joy was getting at. Let us know, for God's sake. But it was a bit of a lark, throw things and all that sort of nonsense.
The throwback from our children's theatre, that the kids would do that, or they would boo or hiss, or more readily than an adult.
Oh, well, yes.
Toughest audience, probably.
Well, you can't fool them. No, you can't fool kids because they see things so directly. There's not all this screen of social muck in the way.
Your the opening season, you played on Androcles or
Androcles. Yeah. What a lovely time playing Androcles. It was wonderful. Sam Payne played Caesar, I remember. And who played the lion? What's his name? Poor fellow is now defunct. I'll think of his name in a minute. How can I forget? I knew him so well, too. Stupid, I'm prematurely senile or something. I don't know. But that was a lovely production and enormous fun to play. Very good show.
And well received.
Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
The second play of the season was the Ecstasy of Rita Joe, which also was a hallmark for, I guess, Joy in terms of...
Yeah. Now there you have a thing that has become a modern classic. I don't think it's the greatest play in the world. I think that it caught people on the raw. People where they were sensitive about the native people and that kind of thing. And it had some great stuff in it. I don't think that it was the greatest play in the world. From the construction point of view, there were places where I felt it was weak. The whole idea of it was very moving, and very true, very real. Franny Hyland did a superb job as Rita Joe. And it was good cast altogether, and a good, really good production. I think the production covered most of the inadequacies of the play itself.
One of the things that Joy mentioned, and I don't know what your memories, if anything, of it, was that there was a lot of, it was being shaped right up to the point, or being still rewritten, almost right up to the rehearsal process. And she remembers that she sat with the door closed and she sat outside the rehearsal hall making sure there would be no one to be disturbed. And when the actors came out, they had quite a feel about them. And do you remember that first rehearsal and what it was like? Or?
Yes, I remember the rehearsals. I remember George Riga, who wrote the piece, was absolutely stymied because he was being called on for rewrites. Now, rewrite something here. This doesn't work, and give me a rewrite on that. And it got to the point where he couldn't cope. He didn't know what he had written, and it made it terribly difficult for him to provide the rewrites that were asked for. I think I think George got a little mentally constipated over that one.
Okay, well, I don't have much more, but I didn't get anyone to speak about. Oh, sorry.
Hello.
How much longer is it going to
Maybe
be?
another 10 minutes.
Oh, it's a very few minutes.
Because Anne can't do anything and she has to leave in half an hour. So.
Oh, I see. Okay, all right.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe
No, we'll be finished in a couple of minutes.
Could you do you remember how the Arts Club started? What brought that and initiated that? Or is that?
It was started I don't really know very much about its origins, actually. But I know that Bill Millard had been the stage manager at the Playhouse and had left there to take over the Arts Club, and proceeded actually to make a considerable success of it. And that was on the small one on Seymour Street, and then went from strength to strength, and then built the Granville Island thing and all that, and is still expanding. But its origins, no, other people would know more about its origins than I do, actually. Though we worked there a fair amount. The last thing that Shirley and I did at the old Arts Club on Seymour Street was the gin game.
I wish I'd seen that, actually.
That was a good experience. It was very tough on Shirley because her mother was in an old age home in Edmonton at the time, and was complaining of the very things that were said in the play, and was in the process of dying at that time too. So it was really very tough on her. Yeah.
Okay, well.
It was a good production, though.
This has been a great interview for me.
Oh, I've gassed on at an awful rate, actually.